Hello, Astartes. You're probably noticing a lot of perspectives thrown your way recently are coming from a very different sort of mental and indeed moral place than you're used to in the Warhammer universe. Indeed, Warhammer has the forces of chaos, but even Chaos Marines tend to somehow have more honor than the foes you're facing these days. I'm talking about, of course, the Sophists. But today, we're here to learn just how to beat the Sophists at their own game. First, we're going to cover just a bit of background about sophistry. Then we'll cover what to expect when encountering these filthy chaos spreaders. Then at last, we'll get to the best part, how to defeat them. Who were and are the Sophists? I don't need to give you the full history. If you're really curious, just search for an audiobook reading of Plato's writing on sophistry. The nuts and bolters of it is this. Sophists believe that excellence in argumentation often must mean pulling off deceiving your audience and even your opponent, and crucially that deception is a natural part of excellence in argumentation, and that therefore there is some moral virtue to be found in being especially effective at deceiving others when it is done for some other cause higher than the truth. Of course, in reality, deception is not a required part of excellence in debate precisely because a superior option that counters the sophist without making use of lies exists. This, by the way, is why so often alliances between relativists, so-called postmodernists, and sophists are forged, as nothing is more sophistic for a sophist to do than to sophistically argue against the existence of their very much existing greatest threat, absolute truth. Though a video on how to fight and defeat relativists and successfully defend the proper standing of absolute truth in the eyes of the public, not to mention the Emperor, are topics for my next video, if this one isn't repressed by the algorithm all the way to the deepest reaches of the warp. There are naturally many consequences of this reliance upon lies for the sophist. In almost every case, the sophists will regard themselves as intellectually superior to others, and they will gravitate toward moral philosophies or religions which indulge their fantasies of superiority. Their thinking goes a bit like this. God created a universe in which might makes right. Tricking others is a form of intellectual might. God has blessed or chosen those most capable of being deceptive, and those people can imagine themselves to be serving a higher good when they act deceptively, as long as they can rationalize how it serves those ends somehow. Now, let's pause here for a moment and address why the sophist is actually wrong about all of this. We will do so by answering three questions. Why the sophist, as far as possible characters or identities go, isn't the most intellectually superior. What sort of character would be the most intellectually and morally superior in this context, and how and why it is that the incorporation of lies into the self is actually the source of ultimate moral and intellectual downfall and inferiority for the sophist. Why isn't the sophist correct about their intellectual superiority? Why isn't the top contest for intellectual superiority one determining the title of best sophist? Simply put, precisely because a superior path that defeats the sophist in the realm of rhetorical combat exists. The existence of a means that defeats the sophist without corrupting the practitioner nor the audience with lies, as with the sophist, proves sophistry is not required for excellence. This simple path very much exists, and will be revealed and further substantiated in numerical order later in the video. And in the future, after this video receives a positive response, I will upload a video on the inevitable fate of all sophists masquerading as philosophers, such as Derrida, Lyotard, Marx, and many more. Some of you may be wondering, what motivates the sophist, and how does one fall to the sophist heresy? As with all who fall to chaos, it is weakness, ego, and desire for special treatment and access to debauched excess that motivates the sophist. With their belief in their own intellectual superiority, what is revealed is an even deeper belief in their status as chosen by the divine, and his belief creates a need to prove this status that comforts them and seduces them to be true. Yes, here the sophist that denies truth, still, secretly, knowing that truth is real, silently clings to the notion of truth within their own minds. The sophist desires power more than anything, For power to them is proof that they are loved by the Creator, and through deceiving others and spreading lies, they believe they can earn themselves both favor and power, and feast upon the special treatments and gifts granted to them by their dark chaos god. When called out on this, the Sophists will always laugh and pretend like there is nothing power-related in what they do. But just because their power interests are petty does not mean they do not exist. Why, all you have to do to see that is look at some gaming journalism. Regardless, this brings us to answering the next question. The character of the actually, intellectually, morally superior being, at least in this context, is the one who practices the superior form of argumentation. The form of argumentation that does not incorporate lies but instead relies upon patience and truth. Here, the Sophists will almost certainly, in their disgusting and disingenuous way, pretend that we are so simple-minded that we cannot fathom being wrong about anything, and that we accuse all with whom we disagree of being Sophists. Oh, if only it were true, what a blessed world that would be by comparison. This lie, they tell, is revealed as such whenever we encounter other honest men. For even there, if we disagree, it is an honorable disagreement between equals that respect each other, and the laws of reason and logic and of truth given to us by the Creator of this universe, not to ignore or deceive others about, but to uphold as holy. We don't assume we are right about everything. We don't merely call everyone with which we disagree a sophist and assume them to be lying. But we keep a close eye on all nearby relevant communications, and when we see sophistry as it exists, as we define it, we call it out, and we beat it down with truth until it is too humiliated to any longer raise its head in our presence. The reason the incorporation of lies into argumentation is the downfall of the sophist is because not only does it cost them credibility with the audience when they are in fact exposed, not only does their very existence imply an intentional, continuous leaking of the pollution of inaccuracy into the world around themselves to serve their own selfish gains, not only does the incorporation of lies into argumentation add burden to the sophist in the form of threads to keep straight, and the inner chaos corruption that comes from being a filthy liar, but also because another superior method exists that we are just about to describe, and the virgin sophist elects to use the inferior method that gives them outsized gains from fooling large numbers of unwitting people, but only when their arch nemesis, the Chad autist, isn't around to perform the superior style of argumentation. How can the sophist be identified and defeated? The sophist can be spotted with a number of hints. Typically, they behave in egotistical ways. For example, they may take unnecessary detours into dead languages that they think make them seem smart. They will come up with witty quotations. They will name-drop important figures. And they will most assuredly incorporate loads of sarcasm and various logical fallacies into their arguments, so long as they think they have the right audience for it. Meaning, we, my brothers, are not in their audience. However, perhaps the single greatest tell of the sophist is that they, when first encountering the Chad autist and still unaware of your hidden power level, will hearken back to earlier moments in the debate and claim that events happened in a different order than they did, in order to claim that actually you are the one doing whatever it is you correctly pointed out they were doing. If you've ever heard that accusing others of doing what they are actually doing is a trope, this sort of thing is classic sophistry. For Chad autist philosophers, logical fallacies are good to be aware of to avoid and spot in the argumentation of others. But for virgin sophists, logical fallacies are tools to be employed against opponents incapable of properly fighting back, like the good little cowardly servants of chaos that they are. That's right, you autists of the world are the greatest enemy to the sophist and have been chosen by God to cleanse the common threads of the world from this disgusting heresy. I can feel your impatience. Fine, out with it then. How does the autist defeat the sophist? Where is the method? Well, here it is. The key to the method is to follow along with everything they are saying, whilst always making your own positive case. Expect a flurry of lies, ad hominems, hand-waving, misdirection, distraction, any fallacy you can think of. Never, ever give in. Never allow yourself to be swept away by your own emotion, for in that state you are far easier to distract and will be lost to the wicked designs of the sophist. Once you've identified that the person you're dealing with is at least sophist adjacent, after a bit of conversation or observation of their conversation with others, follow these steps. Step number 1. Always state and restate your positive case. Step number 2. Segue into going through the entire conversation, line by line where necessary, to refute each point the sophist makes, to point out their logical fallacies, absolutely destroy their argument. Step 3. Go up one notch further to tie everything back into a comprehensive bow. This means that you don't just destroy their argument, you show how their argument has not stopped your argument and the vision that you're presenting from being true. And number 4, repeat as often as necessary until they give up. Now, that technique should be enough to dispatch a good 80 to 90% of your average sophists, but sometimes they insist upon wearing you down and confusing the audience. If you're dealing with a high-level sophist, never forget that you have the ultimate technique available. The ultimate technique is an optional technique employed if you are stuck on step 4 or can't manage to conclude step 3 because of continuous sophist deceit and trickery. It goes like this, and it is called the sublime crystalline object of sophistology. After some back and forth has already taken place, you must create 2 objects, or crystals, one composed of key elements of your position, and the other being composed of the most charitable reading possible of the sophist's position, steelmanning it, based upon everything they've said thus far. First, present your crystal. Your crystal is made up of the claims you've made thus far and the assumptions one would have to make to take them seriously, if any. This crystal is then held up for display to and consideration by the audience. The point here being that the crystal they see is composed of a minimized set of assumptions and very reasonable claims based upon tight logic to form the most plausible crystal possible. Create for the sophist a crystal based upon what they've said. You might even cut out a mistake or 2 for charity that they made, just to emphasize how much better your crystal is than the sophist. This technique is especially helpful when the sophist senses their impending defeat and attempts to muddy the waters or throw sand in the eyes of the audience by claiming something to the effect of, well, you have your opinion, I have mine, but at least my opinions don't involve me being a bad person, or something to that effect. Your job here is to show that this contest is not a matter of subjectivity or opinion, but to invite the audience to decide for themselves which case requires a greater suspension of disbelief to take seriously. In summation, the ultimate technique is to fairly restate the arguments of both sides, making sure to include identification of sophist tricks and manipulation, and then to invite the audience to consider which is more plausible and ask themselves why it might be that the sophist felt it necessary to use so many fallacies to put forward a less plausible argument full of unjustifiable assumptions. Of course, we know the answer to that, and you can suggest it to the audience for consideration. The answer is that the arrogant sophist wasn't expecting to encounter skilled opposition and were intending to manipulate the audience to believe an argument very likely against their own interests and on behalf of their own separate, unstated, and secret motivations. The sophist crystal will always be rotten by comparison. Such an example crystal can be found inside the example rebuttal in the description of this video. That's it. Why does it work? What you, as the Chad autist, are doing here is keeping complete focus and awareness of the fact that your debate with the sophist is happening in a context in which your conversation is being observed by an audience, which, if it is happening online, it most certainly is being observed. Never forget that the unwitting audience is always the prime target and victim of the sophist. As said before, this requires patience and dedication to the truth. What you must do is keep track of the entire flow of the conversation. Always stick to the truth. Know that the form the conversation is going to take is that of back and forth, with the sophist trying to confuse both you and the audience. But each time, you will also be there pointing out and teaching the audience the truth, and then concluding once again with a truthful point you always intended to make. Do this for as long as it takes. Do this for hours. Do it for days if necessary. Most sophists, once they see that their tricks are only making themselves appear less credible in the eyes of the audience, as the conversation with the chat autist goes on and on and on, will respond in a few ways. Mere low-level sophists often give up as soon as they see what is going on. Here they will become whiny, as they are very much accustomed to perceiving themselves as the smartest people around, who've been granted the rest of the world to tyrannize over by the favor of divine will. And therefore, in their arrogance and self-assured certainty of superiority, they have become lazy, seeking out easy and unwitting prey, and unaccustomed to being challenged by true righteous warriors of truth. All the more when stakes for the sophists are low. If, however, they are a higher level sophist, let's say a politician, a corporate public relations officer, a White House press secretary, or even a video games journalist or internet influencer worried about retaining their credibility amongst the base off of which they feed to temporarily sate their unending need for egotistical sustenance, they are likely to resort to even fouler methods, getting you banned from participating in conversation, slandering you personally, getting you canceled on social media, having you swatted by police, or anything and everything they can think of to plug the hole that truth has made in their net of lies, allowing sunlight and bleach to pour into their rotten hives of degeneracy. Nonetheless, brothers, we must persist. Ultimately, the sophist is not the chosen of God, because in the final confrontation, they will be facing off against those who, in order to win their fights, do not need to resort to polluting the world with lies, and instead can compete unencumbered by the weight of deception, free of temptation from the lull of intellectual superiority that the sophist relies upon to sleep at night, and yet ultimately comforts them into a state of inferior weakness. The Chad autist is purer and more focused in every way. The only way the sophists can hope for victory is when they show up to battle and no Chad autists appear. That, my brother, is the ultimate, final reason we must sally forth, no matter how long it takes, no matter the cost we must bear. For when we set forth and we show the others how it is done, they too will step forth, and our burdens will lighten as the enemy recedes. The true chosen of God have been gifted everything they need to defeat sophists without being a sophist and polluting God's creation. Now, my brothers, this is the most important part. These sophists, most likely you have encountered them for the first time when they broke through the walls of a beloved community of yours in order to twist it to the dark perversions of their god of fraud and denial, as has happened with so many communities in the past. But let us say now that with Warhammer, the citadel will not be taken, even though the wall has fallen. Let the hole in our wall become the fountain out of which we pour, not only beating back the enemy sophists from whence they came, but following them into their vile layers of sin and chaos, and through the power of our autism and our love for the Emperor, cleanse their diseased hovels of all their rationalized debauchery through our own very simple method of consistent and insistent application of the truth. For though some percentage of any audience may be lost to sophists, no audience will have its majority lost to the sophists when Chad autists are there to call them on their bullscheisse. That's right. Even in draws, we are victorious against the sophists, and far more often we will have outright victory instead. And remember this, you reject their inevitable claims of harassment and so-called hate speech. Unlike they who come to you only to corrupt your home, you are there to speak truth. Truth to power, and truth to anyone that will listen. The terminology they love to throw around with you will for once attain true meaning. Let their words like, quote, walled garden and gatekeeping come back to haunt them. Force them to expel truth-sayers in a grand act of hypocrisy that will see them choke on their own delusion. For some more assistance to you, my brothers, I have provided here an example case, an analysis of what it looks like to defeat a sophist in the wild. The username of the sophist has been redacted to spare them any further humiliation. First, note that I was engaging with a third party, and then the sophist intervened. I pointed out that their use of Latin was not impressive, but more importantly that they used it to call me a fool, and ad hominem. After this, they attempted to correct the record by changing the past, and did all of that in a post that contained even more Latin and water carrying for BlackRock in the context of supporting the recent Custodes changes in Warhammer, and accusing me of being what they were doing, which is to say calling becoming a sophist whilst literally defending sophistry, all at the same time. Here is a classic case of an out-and-out sophist. And as you can see now, how I handle it? Did I get emotional or confused? No. I followed the steps already laid out in this video. I kept with it, and before long, the truth of the sophist was revealed in his pathetic whining and defeat. What's that? Still not enough? Alright, let's look at some sophistry as you encountered it lately. Oh, what a classic we have here. An instant classic. I think you know the title of this one already. Quote, "Only bigots hate female custodies." The title gives it away. There are no questions that you're dealing with a sophist here. The assumption of hate, the attempts at disqualifying what the opposition says by launching identity-based attacks against those arguing against the interests of the sophist, precisely so no one thinks about what is said. The mere title alone is enough, but let's take a look at the article itself. Where the title sets the stage, the first half of the article downplays and carries water for the forces of chaos that betrayed the fandom with lies about the lore. The second half of the article repeats the lie when it says, quote, "There you have it, there have always been female custodians." The article itself is full of sophistry. Consider this passage, quote, "And it seems to happen every time GW takes a step to be more inclusive, to get more people into the hobby, some bigots on the internet are mad. You might be about to tell me how you're not a bigot at all. You simply really care about 40k lore and its sanctity. But you know what? Save yourself a breath and take a seat." End quote. Where to begin here, my brothers? First, we have more attempts at tricking the audience into not listening to what his opposition says by slandering the character of his opponents, something unrelated to the truth of what they say. They begin by assuming the case, otherwise known as begging the question, when they identify us as bigots without offering any evidence for the charge. Then, they tell us to sit down and be quiet, since ultimately the world in which the opponent never shows up or stays silent is the fantasy wish of the sophist. After this passage, the author then goes on to state that there have been lore changes in the past, and assumes that not only have none of us so-called bigots ever been bothered by lore changes in the past, but also ignores the unprecedented lying to the fandom going on today. The sophist provides examples of lore changes in the past after doing so, using them as a false substitute for evidence, thinking that if some in the audience accept their faulty reasoning, that they will also just go along with the idea that the existence of lore changes in the past must mean that they should save their breath, or should regard others who don't save their breath as only bigots. Their object of desire is control of the perspective of humanity. Their argument is garbage. It relies upon popular tropes, unverified assumptions, and evidence to fit to match statements based upon unverified assumptions. That proves absolutely nothing when delivered in that order. The sophist has a picture they want others to believe because of their individual power interests, and they believe it is morally right to misrepresent the truth and deceive others, like where they assume without proper justification here that none today opposed lore changes in the past, that all who do today are bigots, and that the existence of lore changes in the past forces you to not be allowed to oppose even more changes today, or even speak. But citing lore changes to prove the complaints of others are illegitimate fails completely when the basis of that conclusion rests upon the earlier false assumptions that no one complaining today was upset by past lore changes and that today's complaints couldn't be linked to the blatant lying to the fandom by GW, which the sophist himself contradicted earlier, when he said every so often the so-called bigots express themselves loudly about lore changes. Their whole argument is built upon fallacious reasoning and lies, and this is because they couldn't pull off their sick desires if they stuck to just the truth. For the sophist, sacrificing truth and spreading pollution is worth a shot at having their desires for power fulfilled. Dark desires they are by now well accustomed to hiding from others with lies. Do you see how the ultimate end of the sophist is to control and shackle you? They will use twisted logic to dominate you and the whole world if we allow it. Some say they already have. My brothers, in what world does the sophist wish to live? In what world would that sort of degenerate flourish? How do they want to remake our world of freedom, honor, and sacrifice, and what twisted caricature would it become? The sophists seek to have us live in a world run by so-called experts. To the sophists, already regarding themselves as intellectually superior, they are more than content to spread amongst the people the belief that the true mark of intelligence is found by how quickly and seamlessly one can regurgitate the latest party line swill doled out by the current ruling crop of experts. Fearing truth and knowing that attacking the prevalence in the belief in truth is in their own interest for power, the sophist pressures and otherwise occupies positions regarded as holding expertise, and then defers all thinking and reasoning to whatever the sophistic expert says, and demands that you give up your ability to think critically and do the same. Their loyalties lie outside of truth, and the path to their desire run through the enslavement of your mind. They will stop at nothing to impose their agenda upon minds of others, no matter the cost. Now I hear you asking, what would I do? If you've been following along like you should have, you'll know already. State the problems with the title being simply untrue, biasing thought with assumptions and ad hominem. The divisive and emotionally charged language of the title, combined with its incorporation of falsehoods into itself, is the sure mark of a sophist manipulator. Point out that the downplaying of the first half of the article is actually making it out to be a smaller issue than it is, and then go in for the kill by pointing to the lie they are embracing and peddling in the second half. Point out each and every instance of their filthy, disgusting slime that already pointed out in this video. Remind the audience of why incorporating lies is the path to chaos corruption. Restate the truth that lying to the fandom about lore changes is unacceptable, and then wait for them to reply. So I can do it again, and again, however many times is necessary. To this end, I have attached a formal refutation of the heretic article featured in this communique. The sophists are almost tireless, but we must be actually tireless. Are you going to tell me that you and Astartes are growing weary? That you have neither the energy nor the dedication to fulfill the Emperor's will? No, I didn't think so. Make no mistake, to defeat the sophist is no easy task. It requires sacrifice, patience, discipline, attention to detail, consistency, and persistence. However, if you stay true to logic, truth, and your God-given intuition, refuse to buy into their frame, show the world how their so-called arguments are built upon the straw and sand of fallacies, and tirelessly assert your position, again and again, matching them reply for reply, then, my beloved Astartes, you will be victorious. There you have it. Go now and join your brothers. Learn to wield the powers of truth and logic. Show no mercy to the enemy. Always insist upon truth. Never feel that you have no purpose anymore, for if you can YouTube, type, or speak into a machine that will type for you, you too can be a beacon of inspiration to others, and crush the vile spreaders of chaos, confusion, and despair that are the sophists. If you are lost in life without brothers, or in any way despairing, know that you are wanted, and you are needed, for the Imperium, my brothers.